I'm a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School and an investigator of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. And I've been in the present place since 1986. So I've been in the US for more than 26 to 28 years. And before that, I completed my PhD, or I started my PhD in France, and I ended up actually finishing it in the US. And I've been working on fly genetics since the beginning of my thesis, actually, for almost like 30 or 30 plus years. Yeah, so my lab is, broadly speaking, interested in signal transduction, both at the single cell level, in communication between groups of cells, but also more broadly at the interaction between large groups of cells at the level of tissues, and more recently we've been interested in looking at the communications between different organs. So what we do really is systems biology, trying to understand how complex systems are being built and interact. And we're again trying to focus on the identification of the signaling pathways and the mechanism of crosstalk between different tissues and organs. Yeah, so we basically study genetics at first, and the idea is to ask the system using genetic tools about the answer, basically. So we don't really have a preconceived idea about, we're not really trying to test a specific mechanism. Initially building, so we're not trying to build on previous knowledge. We're doing screens to interrogate very specific questions, and then depending on what we find, we follow the different leads. And so I like that kind of approach, because this is really this is not biased toward what you're going to find. And in fact, when you do take this kind of approach, it really takes you into all kinds of directions. And I think this is really how we can make new discoveries and important findings. So, for example, just to give you one specific example, a number of years ago, we identified the heparan sulfate proteoglycans as being part of Wnt signaling and also HRX signaling. And at the time, this was a bit of a surprise, because everybody was thinking about heparan sulfate proteoglycans as being simple, like glue between cells. But here we're able to implicate them very specifically in specific signaling pathways. And that sort of had a major influence on the proteoglycan field in terms of directing more the follow-up experiments. So that's really what you get from genetics, is to, as long as you have a good screen, which is really what's the difficult part. But if you are able to devise, if you have a robust assay and you're able to develop, to perform a very specific screen, you will come up with interesting leads. So that's why most of our approach is based on using genetics as the primary tool. But I should say that over the years, the way we perform genetic screens has become more and more sophisticated. And we're able to do not simple genetic screen in animals, but we're able to combine this with other type of approaches, like large-scale proteomics, or large-scale RNAi type screens, or phosphoproteomics, transcriptomics, as a way to get different data sets that we can look at in more in an intersection approach. And so this has been, so we're still using genetics, we're still doing screens, but in a much more sophisticated ways. So with regard to the relevance of using a system like Drosophila to cancer, I mean, there are many aspects. I mean, one of them is, first, the most important one, that the pathways that we're studying in the context of development or physiology, most of those pathways, or in fact all of these pathways, are conserved in invertebrates and mammals. And so initially, the way we were studying those pathways in the fly was mostly for their function during development. And as it turns out, many of the pathways which are misregulated during development are the ones that cause cancer in humans. So the fly has been, as well as other systems, like in particular C. elegans, have been really instrumental at defining the major components of signaling pathways. And so the basic studies in the flies have really helped the understanding of the signalization roads that are misregulated in cancer. So that's more the basic discovery part of it. But now I think we can, we can really use the fly as a way to really try to model cancer systems in fly epithelia or in the fly eye, for example, and try to use that as a way to maybe even test different therapeutics or do drug screening. So there are many ways the fly system can be used to study cancer. Like more recently, we've been doing combinatorial type screens to perform synthetic screens to really identify combinations of perturbations which would kill cells which are mutant for different tumor suppressors or oncogenes. And some of those findings we can, again, because things are conserved between flies and mammals, we can really take that knowledge and transfer it or translate it directly to mammalian systems. So there are many aspects, and also more recently we developed this model of which is reminiscent to a cachexia model, where here you can engineer tumors in the fly, and you can demonstrate that there is wasting of different organs. So that potentially can be used as a way to even develop to identify drug targets, and even do small molecule screens to identify potential leads that can be used. So there are many ways that organisms like the fly are relevant to studying of cancers. Yes, I've always been interested in developing technologies. I think first of all, it's very satisfying once you develop a new method, because there is an endpoint. I mean, the biological questions that we're addressing are the same. I mean, the fundamental questions in biology they do not change with time. So, and every time we study a problem, it's only one step towards many steps, and there is basically no endpoints really. I mean, we're getting more and more sophisticated in the understanding of the biological process, but there is really no endpoint, right? But a technique is different, because once you develop a technique, it's applicable, and it's very satisfying to actually see other people using the technology, and this really helps you to move forward very fast. It's if suddenly you can do in 1 week what it took you 5 years before to perform, that's really where you see the full-blown impact of the technologies. And I mean, right now we're all very invested in the CRISPR applications, because this is one of those game-changing, revolutionary techniques which are really are going to have a huge impact on the way we do things. So probably in a couple of years, or even sooner than this, we're going to be able to perform to address questions at the level and speed that we were not able to reach before. So that's why I'm very interested in technologies and their applications. And I always try to encourage people when they join my lab to first to define an important biological questions, but also always think about what is limiting in terms of studying this problem, and see whether or not there is some technology that they can advance, they can develop to help them address the biological question. Yes, so the question here is about the impact of systems biology, and I think that what's really difficult here is first to define systems biology, because there are many different aspects of systems biology. I mean, some people would argue that even when you look at the interaction between two proteins, I mean, this is already a systems biology approach, because so I like to define systems biology. In my context, what I'm more interested in is the system, the biology of organ communication, for example, which I think is something that we don't fully understand yet. But again, there is many different ways you can look at the definition of systems biology, and it's in many cases actually it's more like quantitative biology, or you can define it as systems genetics, or what I really like is the application, the use of the systems biology at the level of interaction between organs, because this is organismal systems biology is what I'm most interested in. Yeah, so in my case, I was interested in in the fly as a system simply because of the beauty and specificity of the phenotypes. Because when you apply genetics, you want to do screens where you're going to find, let's say, 5 or 10 genes which have identical phenotype and really focus on those. And so in many organisms, the phenotypes are not as striking as the way you can generate them in the fly, and you could generate mosaics in a very powerful way, so you can really study the mutant phenotypes very precisely. And so that was initially my interest, and I have to say that I've been in this business for more than 30 years, and I've never really actually felt the need about moving to a higher organism, simply because there are still amazing things that we can study in the fly, and the tools are only getting better and better. I mentioned the impact of CRISPR. So in fact, the biological questions that we can study in the flies are still going to be best studied in the fly. So I see no reason, at least in my case, to move to a different system. And so the challenge I see today is that a lot of people are saying that, like even humans are becoming a genetic model, right? And I think for the people in the field, which are entering the field or which are going to work with flies, I think it's very important to define precisely why they're studying a specific question in the fly, and if you can study the same question at the same level in a different organism, that probably makes sense to do it in mice or even humans. But as long as you're able to identify important questions that are best studied in the fly, then there is always going to be a need for a fly system. So it's really coming down to the question, and because the tools are so powerful that we can do things in the fly much faster, and there are also advantages, like the systems are a lot less redundant. It's also cheaper to work with the fly, and so on. So, but at the end of the day, it's really coming down to the biological question, and if you can convince people that you have a good system, and the fly will survive. Well, that's an open-ended question, and it's don't really have a crystal ball here, but especially, the way it's funny because every 5 or 7 years we have to renew my appointment at the HHMI, and we have to write down basically a proposal about what we see ourselves doing in the next 5 years or so, and it's always very difficult. And in fact, I think everybody realizes that this is usually not very serious. It's a serious exercise at the time that we do this, but things are changing so fast that it's really, I don't even know what I'm going to be doing in 2 or 3 years from now. So I can't really tell you in 20 years what is going to be important, but I do believe that the physiology is the next level of complexity, because if we look at, for example, development, a lot of the principles have been well established. If you look at cell biology, we know a lot about the basic machinery in the cells, and so there is still a lot of very nitty-gritty details to work out. But I think at the end of the day, the real complicated issues are going to be at the system, the organismal level, and in fact, we're going back to the definition of systems biology. A lot of it is physiology, so we're going back to studying basic physiology. And but now we can do it using modern tools. And what's interesting too is that if you look at the different departments, when you look at the universities, at least in the US, there used to be departments of physiology, and all of those have been don't exist anymore. And but in fact, now you start to see departments of systems biology, which to me is more like the recreation of departments of physiology. So I think physiology is always going to be one of the major field in general. And I think for going back to what to recommend students, I think they would probably they should consider physiology in general as a major area. And again, we can study that in the fly very, very well. So I would put my money on physiology.